Okay.
Thank you, thank you. Hello, Shelley.
Hello, Dan. It's so nice to see you, and welcome everyone to the Shareable Wave. I'm Dr. Shelley, as Dan just said, and with perhaps the most anticipated show yet, we're going to talk about MedBeds, Theraphi, and consciousness. And really, that's enough to introduce Dan right there. Everybody knows Dan so well, but I'll just say psychophysiologist, prolific author, inventor, creator, researcher, crystallographer, electrical engineer. Is there anything important I missed with regard to the subject of today's show?
My last name is Winter, but I'm not cold.
Oh yeah, it's fun because we have Father Winter every now and again drop in.
Right, right. Well, you bring up med beds, and so I thought we would start with a sort of a little bit about the physics and wave mechanics of rejuvenation. And
Yeah, and that's perfect because my burning question is really, do medbeds support ensoulment, bliss, and the shareable wave, as does the Theraphi, right? Or is there danger of furthering AI or transhumanism kind of agendas?
that's really an excellent question, Shelley. And what we're saying is that the ability to generate that centripetal implosion force from within is the difference between the AI and being ensouled. Literally to implode from within. We call it fusion in the blood. And it's true that if you relied solely on external forces to create that centripetal force, you wouldn't develop that inner power, that inner battery to steer your own tornado. So that is the issue. And what we think is the parallel here is similar to where if you use some plasma like Theraphi.net or other ways to be charged, that if you do the proper grounding and hydration afterwards, so you get in ground and phase lock to the earth, that enables you to, as it were, absorb the spin and make it your own. So indeed, there are many ways to help induce bliss, and many of those ways that we can help induce bliss, even technologically, with implosion sound or Theraphi plasma, they can be wonderful, but indeed they're not a replacement for your own inner work. and that difference is why you need to bring your intention to the table, as it were.
Always intention, the focused human intention. Okay, but as a tool, just the technology, is it more an important question to ask in whose hands is the tool? And like you said, um, intention is so much a part of this. But if you think power is outside of yourself, you'll be entrapped. Like this is the slippery slope that we have for, say, psychotherapeutics, right? Ketamine assisted psychotherapy or any of these man-made technologies that don't connect us with that perfected activation of the spark gap, our or
Yes.
Indra's net, all of those things. And so
I'm thinking of our wonderful Theraphi partners in Barcelona, where we showed that Theraphi was dramatically helpful in inducing depth in hypnosis and psychoanalysis. So getting people to a deep state, it's clear that Theraphi can be very helpful. But again, you start that centripetal force, but then you take that with your own intention and steer it. So that is the tricky part here, that indeed we can help you implode, but we can't make you implode. and that's that is
yeah,
toward the inner
okay.
fire. Mhm.
Okay, so as you know, when I first asked you to do this show, I had said I've been away from my Theraphi for 4 months, and when I came back, it is just exponentially that much more powerful than it ever has been in the past. And I'm that's what made me think of the med beds and consciousness and the sphere and so on. And do you feel like this is a component, this is part of what would explain that? Because I mean, it has been off the charts dramatically helping my clients in a way that in the past might have needed a little prompting, a little guidance, but now, I mean, it is.
Well, there's many ways to think about that. First, I'm delighted and grateful that you're having that great experience. I must say that we're getting lots of reports like that, and interest in Theraphi.net is off the charts because of
Yeah.
these amazing success stories. And part of this, Let's just think for a moment that what we're teaching in terms of the physics is that as the Earth comes closer to what Christians call the rapture, or the Pleiadians say the nuclear generators of the frequency fence and the moon are decaying, however you look at it, the physics is that the Earth is coming closer to being implosive. That is, the Schumann harmonics are more phase conjugate, it's more centripetal. A practical example, we think that more people are beginning to be able to lucid dream, which is a good indicator that auras are beginning to implode. And Christians call it the rapture because literally it's the moment when you go through that black hole and you begin to propagate in the longitudinal array we call the collective unconscious. So that onset of that situation electrically means on Earth, we would hypothesize that more people have access to bliss, but also as that happens, the people that are not ready for compression or bliss, that cannot do a shareable wave, for example, people who are still full of anger, those people will go nuts more quickly, would be the hypothesis here. So that when bliss becomes more available, people need to be closer to that shareable wave, that is to have sorted their emotions to the point where they are memories of pure principle and thus serve collective survival.
So this isn't really going to have the effect of the 100th monkey. Just because a whole bunch of us have bliss doesn't imply that they'll get it by osmosis or something.
Well, I think we are saying the 100th monkey metaphor is useful here, that there is a critical mass. And indeed, as more humans get access to bliss process and lucid dreaming, that critical mass of humans matters, as when they measured 1 million children singing together, it affected the solar flares, measured 11 times. So critical mass of humans, yes, but also that the Earth is coming more to the alignment of charge compression. You know, the New Age woo-woos called it the photon cloud. We now realize it's more about the perpendicularity of sun, Earth, solar alignment, which is a cross, a holy cross, literally phase conjugate. And that with the galactic alignments, as those things come into perpendicularity, just as, for example, Agnihotra is more effective at sunrise, sunset, because the sacred 4 directions are the physics of the 4-wave mixing we call phase conjugation. So that perpendicularity, the alignment of the solar system with the galaxy, et cetera, that's been written about elsewhere, all of those things increase the potential of the Earth to complete the compression cycle, to be implosive, and therefore serve the rapture. But it also means that literally thoughts speed up, things go faster, and that which is unstable destabilizes more quickly. But those who are ready to think about shareable waves and be pure principle, you know, they have closer access to bliss. And as a trigger, then Theraphi would be having a quicker reaction, I suppose.
Okay, I like that you mentioned the angles because in my understanding that almost equates to angel, like the angle of like photosynthesis. We have to look at the photo, not just the photosynthesis, but like the holographic principles. So if we're just looking, we know what Theraphi does, but would you say the MedBed technology can create that spatially differentiated, phase conjugated, whatever, longitudinally coherent rainbow body that is going to be essential?
Well, the concept of MedBed, in my view, which has been, I think, oversold on the secret space program, Super Soldier
Ah,
Talk. Uh,
mhm.
Randy Kramer started his GoFundMe group and then realized, oh, we already did that. Uh, but the concept of MedBed is no more or less, I think, than the physics of negentropy. That is, the more you make an electric field, which is implosive and centripetal, as phase conjugate optics first proved, the more you get what they call time reversal, which is literally in physics identical with negentropy, which is self-organization. So actually, although physics called it time reversal, in fact, what they measured was self-organization. So to make that simple, things like Theraphi or just simply implosion sound, the more broad spectral the phase conjugation, the broader the spectra of harmonics, the bigger the 2 pine cones kissing noses, the more implosive and therefore the more negentropic, self-organizing, healing, literally. And in theory, we believe now that as you make that higher power density, and even more broad spectral, that is where Theraphi already known to be a lucid dreaming trigger, that principle becomes the physics of stargates and portals, quite literally.
Ah.
And so, and the ability to identically match the send versus receive point conditions, which is why, for example, it's recently been discussed at length, that even the very high-tech extraterrestrials are able to set up their stargates and portals better at where naturally cross Earth magnetic lines, because it's naturally centripetal and longitudinal. And so we see there's a correlation between the natural sacred sites and the physics of setting up a stargate. There is a relationship, and that relationship is implosion onto longitudinal distribution.
Okay, well, you just raised about 25 questions that I'd like to address right there, but I'll come back. I'll try to do this systematically. Okay, so just the machine from a purely, say, mechanical source and not adding anything like our DNA radio library would offer, just not even focused human attention or intention, can the technology actually create fusion in the blood? I know Theraphi does, but
Well,
I'm wondering, go ahead.
what we're saying is, when we refer to fusion in the blood in that article, fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood, it's discussing the measurements we made that the recursive braiding triggered by coherent phonon, initially of heart coherence, which is my original measure of heart coherence, realheartcoherence.com, that when that recursive braiding becomes successive layers of embedding, the plot thickens, thread, string, rope, fat rope, that those nested or embedded or entangled harmonics create the possibility of phase conjugate implosion into fusion right at the level of hydrogen, which we now know is fractal and phase conjugate, at the center of every DNA ladder rung. And that physics of fusion, we think, is the beginning of human bliss process, and climaxes in some form in the physics of Kundalini, which is broad spectral. And so, there are correlates, the phonon, the low frequency infrasound cascade, and then therefore the Flame and Sound software part of flameandmind.com. These are all triggers which would enable that. But again, we're not saying this is a purely technological solution to bliss or immortality. We're saying we can use the triggers in the same way that, Luke Skywalker, when he went underground to raise the Jedi and become a Jedi, if he didn't do the inner work, he wasn't plasma projected, which defines Jedi. So I think, and that's why when the super soldiers and the secret space program people are talking about them using MedBeds to glue on broken limbs and arms and, fix the body, they were not claiming they could bring back people from the dead or re-ensoul. I don't think. And I'm remembering our good friend Michael Rice, whom I greatly respect as a shaman, and a family relative of his had died, and he actually brought her back from the dead. Actually, it's a true story. And we have some idea of what that physics involves. And it has to do with how close the plasma cloud is to be able to re-embed in the body physically. Because now that we know what consciousness is, we do. Consciousness is a charge, a plasma tornado vortex. And yes, you can take it outside the body and still see, and we understand that physics, because you could take that plasma tornado with you. But there are some definite limitations, like don't try to do it in a metal box, and don't try to do it while you're angry, etc., because the plasma tornado will not leave your body. But we know a lot about what makes the plasma tornado projectable, which is the physics of why things like implosion sound and Theraphi assist with lucid dreaming and remote viewing, because now we know exactly what the physics of those things are. It's accessing another node in a fractal longitudinal array.
Again, so many ideas just to launch from here, but number one, my dream is to have Michael Rice design the house that I'm going to live in. Okay. Beyond that, considering you were mentioning the correlation, so the correlations between, say, modulations of the human brain, the electromagnetic field, right, and consciousness, we would be remiss to kind of ignore the whole 5G implication, especially regarding the biotechnology so prevalent these days, right? but this reminds me, and this is going back to what you've triggered already 3 or 4 times now, is Dan Burish's work with Lotus and the Ganesh phenomena. And Dan called it the Ganesh particle. I remember talking to you. Dan referred to, or deferred rather, to you. And you said, no, this is a Ganesh phenomena. But do all roads lead to Rome, in this sense that I'm looking at root words here, and Ganesh sounded a bit like genetic. Ganesha, genetic, I don't know. I'm just playing with words here. But Ganesh, the mover of obstacles, and his lotus imagery, something magnificent arising out of the muck. But what he was saying there, because you mentioned bringing somebody back from death, Dan Burish's work described a quantum leap where plant became animal. And so the most notable fact of all of that, though, were that specific conditions had to be present, right? Or as he described it, unusual thermal anomalous emissions occurred. But anyway, the gene functions like a waveguide, just like those C-type selkies in Dan Burish's work. And so I'm coming back to the genetic manipulations, the 5G implications, say, on, do I have to spell it out? I'm kind of trying to not say it out loud, but what the whole world has been trying to be talked into with this genetic gene manipulation injection things going on. Right? I'm trying to not say that out loud, but take it away.
Well, yes, I mean, Dan Burish was using another language to talk about a golden ratio cascade of frequencies. That was the basics. That's where he started. And clearly, the broadest spectral golden ratio imploder on the planet is DNA, for sure, because all the way from hydrogen to the longest embedded big braid of DNA, it's all golden ratio from the ratcheted dodecahedron on up. That's goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So obviously, that golden ratio phase conjugate implosive fractal cascade is what DNA was designed to do. And that's how it gets centripetal. Now, what we're saying here is that if we provide an external field source, which is also centripetal and also tuned to Planck, like Theraphi.net plasma, that we can, in many but not all cases, assist that process. And I will say, we're not allowed to advertise this, and this is not a medical claim, but we can say that significant Theraphi centers have reported dramatically that the plasma has dramatically helped people struggling with vaccine side effects. I can say that for sure. That's a reports that have been real, which means that this kind of fractionation that happens if the DNA braid process has been fractured, that an implosive field can definitely be helpful, and that's real and that's powerful. And but whether we can ensoul DNA with an external mechanism, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But if we know the science of what ensoulment is, I think we can, move our children into those environments of which Theraphi is part.
Right. Okay. So it's not even just the side effects of the vaccinations, it's the biotechnology that is my concern of overriding the genetic function. So genes function as holographic memories, right, of the existential kind of blueprint. So we don't want biotechnology rewriting that for sure. However, it was found in those subtle matter particles can be imparted across what Dan Burish called the Shiva portal, but you describe these portals and black holes and the tornado that forms the eyeball all the time. So in keeping with that language, those C-type selkies appeared to be utilizing the acoustic antennae, and sound redirects biotechnology. I'm just saying, is this a danger? Are we in trouble because now we've implemented a receptor for something like Project Bluebeam or the Voice of God, technology and so on? Is this something, although we can help with the physical ramifications of vaccine therapy, can it help biotechnology that's inserted and reforming the shape, form, information of our genetic material?
Well, this might seem like an indirect answer, but what occurs to me strongly is the connection between what Burish called the Ganesh particle versus what the theosophist and the theosophist clairvoyant call the Anu in the occult chemistry work and Leadbeater and Brisson. And I knew some of the people who were doing that work, micro psi perception, which later became physics in the psi perception of quarks book by Phillips. Point being, like Murray Zupa in Buffalo and the president of Theosophy International in Illinois that I knew, and they were clear. When you look at these subatomic particles, the Anu, which has a 7-spin, 5-spin slip knot, which later was related to the quark beautifully in the physics literature. So the clairvoyants saw subatomic physics before subatomic physics knew the structure of quarks, and they were right. It's a beautiful story. Point being that when they saw these little subatomic particles, like he was talking about Ganesh, they were very clear. Some of them were impish and happy and mischievous and self-aware, and others were in pain, actually, literally in pain. And I strongly believe here's an example of that difference. If you have the subatomic particles inside the DNA of a happy child dancing in a puddle, that's a very happy subatomic particle. However, if you have a subatomic particle inside aluminum that's been fabricated by high voltage, and every single atom is in pain in that aluminum, which is why large aluminum plants generate huge disasters all over the planet regularly, every single subatomic particle in there is not happy. And that difference is charge distribution enabled, literally embedding. So any piece of a subatomic particle that's been isolated is by definition not in the flow, unhappy. Very simple. Any water on this planet that's in the flow is happy water. Any water on this planet that's totally isolated is unhappy water. And that's due to the fractal physics of hydrogen itself. So I think that's an introduction to how to think about these things. That so what technology, ultimately we can make some technology that enables embedding in the bigger flow. Theraphi is part of that. But ultimately, if you don't have access to nature, it's not it's not a permanent solution.
Yeah, and it's not so much a solution, even just to do in meditation and visual imagery and so on, but that does create a frequency within the body to hold that, just as it does to hold compassion or joy. I mean, these are just frequencies. So can we do you personally think that we can kind of override the environment by holding that frequency in such a coherent state that then we can access that, perfect embedding distribution?
I will talk from my own experience. I feel a ringing in my ears and bliss a lot. Okay, even today in the living room in this house, and I love it. But I work very hard to make the electrical environment, to make that sustainable. So every few hours, I turn off every single transformer and refrigerator and everything in this room in order that I can feel that grow. And I feel a click when I turn all the gadgets off, and then my aura gets bigger very quickly. So I'm very much aware that yes, I can hold the bliss, and yes, I can build that bliss much better when I turn all my gadgets off. It's very practical. So another way I like to say that is sometimes you walk on water, but generally you take a bridge.
Yeah, thank goodness for the bridges. But even that, not every Theraphi can be set up to operate, exactly at midnight and the rising of the sun and the perfect four-wave mixing and so on. So in the potentiality, the quantum foam, whether it's the wave or the particle, it's still all within the domain of consciousness. And then somewhat subject to the observer effect, no? And so, but then the question becomes who's observing? Maybe we're not just limited, or maybe us from a more expanded view can do the observing for us, aka, maybe referencing greater dimensions. Can we observe from that perspective? And let it manifest here. Just little magic.
Well, the physics would be that the actual observer is always the site where the plasma is most imploding. So the sun, for example, is absolutely the big observer because that's the implosion. That's the slingshot on the way to the galaxy heart. So the observer in your room is not just your awareness, but as Castaneda said, the place of power in that room where charge implodes, which is where every ghost has to go if they want delivery. So the observer function is actually the locus of the most implosion. That's what the observer is, because that's where the tornado has an eyeball. Perfect reference.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a perfect reference. And if we could just remember that, especially in those times where we need it most, where we're being challenged, right? Because I mean, it's a little bit similar to the dare I say truth that we're surrounded by love all the time. It is truth, right? I mean, we're just surrounded by that perfect frequency. We have access to it all the time. It's like the hippocampus remembering Christ consciousness, right? It's just a matter of tapping into it. And then it's like my clients coming out of the Theraphi, not only are they physically healing very serious conditions, but that ripples out into their life, their family, healing family relations. It's never just the one item that they come to me for.
Oh, it's a beautiful story. I'm recalling when famous Dr. Buck, Bucke, wrote his book, Cosmic Consciousness. And he had this intense bliss experience one evening, I think. But I believe it was near sunset. He was like a sleigh ride. He was near a forest. Everything was perfect. The charge was perfect. And he had this intense, like the whole universe is alive. And I could feel it at that moment. But, nobody ever wrote a book that way while sitting in a metal building in electrosmog in a city. It never happened. Well, so the Theraphi can help create some of those conditions. But also the principle behind it can help us create those conditions for ourselves, access to nature, et cetera, and find the place of sacred space and make a place of power and altar in your room, et cetera, biologic architecture, all those lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going back in your memory to recreate as close as you can that experience.
Um, well, Shelley, I had prepared some information about the wave science of the harmonics in Theraphi versus quantify and plasma fire for
Oh,
this
yeah.
conversation, since you mentioned that. Um,
Yes. Thank
but,
you.
but is this a good time to do that?
Yeah.
Um, um,
Perfect. Yeah.
yes.
Thank
So,
you.
well, so what we're saying is basically the more broad spectral the fractal phase conjugation, the more negentropic or implosive the pine cone at center. Now, the technical reality was that, and we taught all of that at fractalfield.com/implosion sound. We first graphed this sound equations for perfect implosion sound. And then we made that software available at what we say is the world's most powerful bliss-inducing binaural, flameinmind.com/flamensound. Now, people have asked questions about how that's applied in Theraphi versus Quantify versus plasmafire.com versus 5vibes.com. So there's four ways, that you can play with this. You can play with just the implosion, bliss implosion sound with the flame and sound at flameinmind.com. Or you can, how have we put that in the hardware? That's a simple question. For example, people ask, well, you can externally put those harmonics in the quantify or plasmafire.com, PHIRE, but Theraphi is not normally shipped with external modulation option.
Hmm.
And people obviously would like to know why. and I thought maybe we could explain a little bit in the process, maybe you understand the physics a bit better here. So here's the story. So in Theraphi, we take extremely high power, 500,000 volts, to create a very strong harmonic cascade all the way from optical conjugation in the noble gas to RF radio frequency conjugation, triggering the noble gas to ignite at 500,000 volts down to the infrasound modulation. The way that's done at very high power in Theraphi is we harmonically synthesize the low frequency part of that cascade in the hundreds, which is like about, I don't know, 12, 15 harmonics, perfectly golden ratio to Planck. And then we take that synthesized complex wave as a single complex wave, not a stereo, single one, and we modulate in the radio frequency range, and that's a very broad spectral mixing that's accurately done, so it's conjugate from RF all the way down to infrasound. Then we dump that out. Now, to get this high voltage, we dump that single complex wave all the way up to RF into a bifiller Tesla coil. And that's where it goes up to 500,000 volts. And at the same time, because it's bifiller, 2 halves to a center pole end, we split it 180 degrees out of phase, and we have 2 perfectly opposing complex waves all the way up to RF at 180 degrees out of phase. And that way we get the very big pine cones kissing noses. Well, what that means is at very high power, that the way that's synthesized internally in the Theraphi is it starts with a single complex wave, not a stereo, where it goes into the bifiller, meaning that external modulation options for Theraphi start with mono, not stereo, because we split that into stereo in the bifiller Tesla coil. So that's, and also external modulation in Theraphi, because it's such high power, can actually be potentially a bit tricky or even dangerous. For example, if you got the level of the amperage of the voltage of the external modulation audio inputting to Theraphi over the normal critical audio, you could oversaturate and things get messy pretty quick at those power levels. So that's not ideal for external modulation. You can have an external modulation option if you requested from Paul, but there are some precautions, et cetera, et cetera. Versus in Quantify and plasmafire.com, it's beautifully built where you can take a full stereo complex wave 2-channel. And that's what's fun, because when Patrick wrote the Flame and Sound software, he wrote it so you can actually, in addition to make the perfect implosive cascade, then you further modulate for the frequencies for the heart chakra, the base chakra, and you can feel it. The brain, you can actually trigger one gland at a time. Yeah. And so that's why there are actually 3 separate places where you can take the Flame and Sound Perfect Bliss binaural. You can put it into the Quantify, theraphi.net/quantify, or into Plasmafire, Plasma, PHIRE.com, or into those vibrators, which are so powerful just with the acoustics on the spine, 5 Vibes, PHIVIBES.com. So that's a little background on what the options are for the implosion sound and the difference between the hardware versus the software.
You know, just anecdotal here, but I see often people coming in, say with drug addictions or something like that. And what happens is there's a release, you know, you might call it a ghost, but it's a possession in my mind, in my experience of watching, of observing. Now, I see that in the Theraphi, but I've never experienced that in the plasma fire. So I think there's specific functions when we know precisely what our outcome is, I mean, desired, you know, the client comes and says, you know, I'm having this relationship issue and I have sciatic pain, right? So, okay, well, that's pretty easy. We can use the plasma fire specifically to address that. But with the Theraphi, it often will do this cleanse, release what needs to be released, and then bring about that perfect opportunity for bliss, and that's the phase conjugation and that spirituality, as I've heard you describe it as well, although some people like that and some people like science, but it's the same thing, right?
And I would comment here that the stories I've heard about remote healing, both Theraphi and also Quantify, actually, even Plasmafire, as you described it. But the stories I've heard about releasing ghosts successfully were Theraphi stories, actually, which maybe is because the plasma, we think the physics, as Korotkov measured, where ghosts go after death, and they're seeking the place of power because they need to gain centripetal force. So we know exactly what it is that traps a ghost, actually. It's the inability of the plasma to implode sufficiently to get critical inertial escape velocity for the transverse waves to implode and be distributed in the fractal longitudinal array, the collective unconscious. And that's why successful death is an electrical black hole. There's all the indicators. We've got the infrasound you hear during death, and we've got the geometry you see during death. It's all about the body making a black hole to implode successfully to get you inserted into the collective unconscious. So if you die without the centripetal force, that plasma count of the ghosts, and there's lots of ways to measure the ghosts, low temperature, and Korotkov did it with infrared. I mean, ghosts are measurable. Hello. So we know exactly how a ghost gets stuck. It also has to do with where emotion is stuck from a key emotion of their life. But what releases them, it relates perfectly to the physics of what Theraphi is, which is why a person with lots of bliss in their aura can also do a good job of releasing ghosts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that in itself could lead us into all kinds of further conversations. Did I understand you had a slides, some slides that you wanted to share, or not? It's fine. I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you did.
Well, actually, the visuals are all at the websites we mentioned.
Okay.
So if
Yeah.
you look at fractalfield.com/implosion sound, you see all the harmonics and the science behind it. And if you look at the Quantify website, theraphi.net says Quantify, or plasmafire.com. So all the visuals are there, and I had them ready, but we don't really need to. We could have a good conversation. It's more fun anyway.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Okay, so here's just one random question, then I'm going to get back on track, okay? You're talking about this very specific frequency, and so many people for what millennia have anticipated this rapture event, this ascension, and so from spiritual, religious, scientific language, we can describe the same thing. But do you think that that's a possibility? Say through the sun, magnifying it, coming in, obviously beyond the sun, but coming in and magnified through the sun. That kind of a burst of energy could release all those people, say, that have been stuck like a ghost is, as you were describing it. And so then that would kind of speak to what the Bible says is, all these people being raptured and
Yes. No.
that story. That's just an add-on. It's not really part of my
No, I like that conversation. I have been joking for years from the Christian fundamentalist book called "You Do Not Want to Be the Left Behind." And what does it mean to be left behind when the rapture comes? But actually, we think there's good physics there, that if the solar plasma geometry reaches a critical mass of centripetal force, and the Earth harmonics are more centripetal, Schumann harmonic cascade we now know is phase conjugate. So all of those things add to the centripetal force of the Earth if we embed ourselves in it using nature, and means more people lucid dream and more people take memory through death. And so when that reaches critical mass, when the rapture comes, yes, the guns will melt. They have the wrong dielectric constant to do charge implosion without heat. And yes, the ancestors will be raised from the dead. What that means is those that are embedded in the fractal Earth grid, the dodecaecosa Earth grid, that, as every Aboriginal knows, my ancestors are in those song lines, and talking to them is the most important thing I do with my whole life. And in fact, the ability of those ancestor memories to be released has to do with the plasma of the whole Earth imploding through the heart of the sun, as it were. So the release of ancestors at the time of the rapture, there's some very interesting physics there once we understand plasma.
So again, the onus is still on us to get it. The onus is still on us to become shareable, to participate in the shareable way, because that's what would trigger that event and enable that to happen, as opposed to, just a big, powerful.
Well, and I'd like to make the sort of, do the self-empowering work message even more emphatic here by placing a short ad here. The last 4 or 5 films that we have made in our multi-million view YouTube channel have been about that ability to lucid dream and have bliss is the only way out of extraterrestrial parasites and extraterrestrial history. The Greys, the Dracos, and all the abductions and it all starts with who is the lucid dreamer. That's what we're saying in all those conversations. Point being for this conversation is that, what we've been saying is that all of the ETs who are coming here with some kind of parasitic intention, each one of those ETs, although their technology is way ahead of ours, needed something here. And what they needed was the piece of the DNA library that enabled them to get a soul, literally develop the lucid dreaming longitudinal body. So that's a clue that the electrical geometry of the evolving Earth can cook up a kind of DNA that can have a soul. And guess what? That's Humpty Dumpty's egg. And that's what we evolve. And so when we get the ability to get a longitudinal bubble, the Ba from the Ka, the Kesjan, the rainbow light body, coherently, we get something that all of the ETs are coming here for. And so doing that bliss discipline to actually develop a coherent lucid dreaming aura, that is also the climax of ET history and emerging from parasites.
And doesn't that also just emphasize not to give your power away, not to expect or anticipate technology or anything else outside of yourself can give you that? The
That's
only
right.
way
You
is
can get
for you to do it. But we all have that God spark. We all have that component within us. It's just for us to connect with it and allow it to grow. And the Theraphi helps to build that.
it's true. And
As does, go ahead.
yes, and as does every single day making the simple decisions: diet, lifestyle, environment. Did I do my exercise? Did I get my fresh air? Did I get my nature? Did I get my live food? Did I get my vitamins? Did I do my meditation? Did I do my yoga? Did I build my aura today? That's every day. And eventually that has critical mass, and Theraphi is part of that, but it still means the work.
Okay, and one of the most important elements of all of that is our water. Our bodies, 75 or higher, hopefully, percent water. How can we assist the water, the memory in the water that we are, that communicates with everybody in our environment? How can we help to make that more fractal, Dan? Something.
I happen to live next to where there's literally a wide stream of running fresh ice cold mountain water right behind me here. I'm very, very lucky in the period. And you know what? We got a pool and we got a spa and a tub, but getting right in the raw ice cold mountain water, I tell you, it's like aura building. But so living water is a wonderful and rare and priceless thing, and that's the issue. Now, it's true that I have a prejudice here and another ad, but we do have technologies for that also. The imploder.com, the new ultra imploder, is fabulously powerful. And I've been even just yesterday, wonderful Helen from UK told me she just had the imploder shower, and when she first used it, she felt such a buzz, and even the stops in her drains started working, and it was just one little vortex. So the imploder.com vortex is helpful, obviously. And also zapping the water with the plasma therapy is incredibly wonderful. But there's 100 ways to charge water. I'm just saying, we have some of our technologies are perfect implosion.
Yeah, and that is something that I always invite my clients to do. And in fact, when I'm doing the non-local clients, I request that they have a glass of water with them while I'm doing the non-local session with them. Okay. But so I'm doing some additional research on the side with places like IONS, you know them, and there's a university in Portland that we're doing this research with that has to do with communicating with the water. So we all know that we can put our intention into the water, and the water will retain that. Water will retain the memory from everything that has passed through, right? But I'm thinking about it from the other way around. Can we communicate in such a way that we're receiving information from the water or from fire or from plasma or from any of our elements, but specific back to water? Because if, say, the ultra imploder is making it that fractal, does it not have access in a more coherent manner to more water, right? And so isn't that
That's right. So we've made the central bond in the water more implosive, more broad spectral, more negative. So it sucks better, and it's sucking in a bigger wave, of course. So anything that made that water more alive, in practical terms, that means, when you take your shower or your bath is the best time to ask your inner voice questions, because that's the time when all those hydrogen bonds are more available to radio your DNA. So it's pretty simple, but
Yeah.
that's a beautiful principle.
Okay. And, with my background from the native traditions, we think of water as an entity, and it can communicate directly with us. And the same for fire, but I mean, these certain very specific conditions have to exist, right?
Well,
And so,
well, yes, and the bigger picture here, I'm thinking of what the Native Americans called the Great Spirit, which we
mhm.
would call the universal intelligence. We actually have a lot more information now of what that is. It's kind of the radio that goes through Planck, and hydrogen being so fractal is a good way to radio to Planck. So the radio that's going through Planck is that harmonic series that eventually is perfect embedding at a galaxy-wide level. And so the physics of the radio that is Planck and fractal phase conjugation is a good introduction to the physics of what Native Americans call the Great Spirit. And that Great Spirit was more available to them when they were in nature and less available to them when they moved into cities. It's simple physics, really. So, and then people have such great confidence in the collective unconscious and the collective mind and the Great Spirit, begin to realize that that voice is more available to them in the right environment, and to actually work to create those environments, because it's simple, practical science, fractal science.
Fractal science.
That's
Well,
what fractalfield.com means.
yeah, that's right. And so I was just going to ask, where else people can go if they wanted to investigate further on the topic of today's show, but on any of the things that we've mentioned. Fractal field, what would be maybe one or two that they would easily remember just before we wrap up here?
Well, the water science, the imploder.com, the plasma science, Theraphi.net, the brainwave science, flameandmind.com, where you see the flame and sound option, what we've discussed today, the implosion sound series at fractalfield.com/implosion sound, and the extraterrestrial history story with the modern happy ending at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood, the fractality of DNA at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So those are some of the links. But and the basic index at fractalfield.com is pretty inclusive. And my email is info@fractalfield.com if people want to communicate. And I'm always happy to work with you, Shelley. I love your smile.
Thank you. And it's so fun. I mean, it's so fun listening to you. I bet you've never had a problem trying to remember your passwords, I'm thinking, as you're listing off all the websites. Okay. The whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you. Who was that? Aristotle. So what I just wanted to say is together we are more than the sum of our parts, our
Mhm.
dear family, and let's do something with that, right? Remember
Yeah.
who we really are. Remember our divine spark, and know that there are these wonderful teachers like Dan that have developed tools that can really help us tap into that in a more powerful, exponentially incredible way.
Mm. And
With
Shelley,
that, yeah, go ahead.
you have been doing your homework, and you're getting more competent than ever in the related researches here, and you're sounding more coherent than ever. And I think I can retire soon because you're doing great.
No, don't ever do that. Listen, it was a great heartbreak that I was so close to you for 4 months and couldn't, and they wouldn't let me out of England to pop over to France. But nonetheless,
Oh.
we'll see you
Any,
soon. I hope that we can do some more ceremony in the days to come. So it's only the shareable wave that survives. So
exactly,
that's
exactly. Blessings.
shareable.
Thank you,
Okay.
Shelley.
Bye. Yeah, and thank you, Dan, and bye for now, everybody. Appreciate it so much, Dan. Look forward to
And
seeing you again.
stay in touch and keep that wonderful smile.
Ah, you bet.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks.